Hey dude, how's it going? Thanks for sending in the new version. I guess let's take a look first and then we'll get into the notes.
I'm not your man.
I'm what you want here, I'm what you need here. Just you and me, my love in paradise. Now till the end of time. From here on out, you're mine.
Awesome. I think all the beats we want are there now. It's just the main notes I've got this time around, especially because we're kind of at a certain stage, is just locking down the timing of a few things. And some of that's going to be the timing of the cuts and some of that's going to be a couple other things, but we'll go through. There's not tons of notes this time because I think you're at a good stage that once you hit these kind of big picture notes, like we're going to go over, like there's only a few big picture notes left. And then it's really just got to be about, execution at that point, because I think all the main kind of beats of everything are really clear and working really well. Let's have a look at this quickly. There might be a little, sorry, I was just thinking about timing. I've been thinking about timing a lot because at work, I've got a shot where characters doing kind of a repetitive action. It's like, how do you find a way to break it up? So right now it kind of would go in and we go, and I wonder if there's a way of getting a little bit of a in, there's a tiny hold, 1, 2, quick, and then hands down. Like there's just a little bit of rhythm there. Right now it's in, 1, 2, drop. Maybe if it's in, 1, 2, drop. So there's like a tiny hold after the in. That's just a timing note that came to me just then. But these are kind of things we can tweak as we get further along. These aren't big picture things. Same with this very first note in the timeline, which is just look, when your hands are coming off, you can do your fiddling and then you can kind of get a bit of break up in the spacing of how things are dropping just so we're not twinning. Anyway, that's not a super important note. Let's get into kind of the beats and the things that I think. So the first thing look jumped out to me is I want to be looking at her here, because he's kind of doing this prolonged held man note, and then she's the one that you want to be looking at because she's doing like the action of approaching, but he does this very big pose change here where he turns away. I just think you can do that turn away pose as she gets to him, so it's just like the fact that it's leading draws my eye over to him, when in reality I want to be looking at her doing the I'm what you want singing bit whilst he's doing the held note, it's just a leading the eye thing. So once you get deeper into this and you're breaking her down, approaching, he can just be like slowly leaning back, maybe, and like trying to get away from her. I'll do it side on so it's closer to the shot, like backing away slightly. And then when she goes in for the pull, he can, like as she crosses his body, maybe he can pull to a bit closer to what your pose is. Maybe that pose wouldn't be as much contrast as this and this, but the main thing is you want to be looking at her because he's doing this one prolonged note and she's doing the main singing and approaching, which is, where we want the audience's eye to be. So leave that turn, and I think probably turn it down a little bit right up until the grab. Once she grabs, that's when he can back away, because it's kind of all part of this one movement where they're moving together and he's getting yanked. Cool. It's a mechanics thing here that I'm thinking about, which is I feel like just trying to understand the mechanics. So there's a step, she does this, there's a step, and then she does this flick. But when I look at without the drawings on top, I feel like both the legs are kind of moving here. So I think this first step needs to be very deliberately where the next pose is, like here. And then I think what could be interesting is when you do this spin, you could twist her body more, because I think a lot of it's in the arms, but I'm not feeling it in the twist of the body. That's separate. And the other thing is I think you can come up, you do the first step. Let's go wide camera again, see if you can see me. Wrong way. You do the first step, so this leg does the first step. I'm doing it in reverse. Do the first step, boom, spin, and this leg can maybe be off the ground as we're in a held pose. And then as we come back, this leg can lead as we go into the next pose, right? So just so I think you get a bit more flow and interest. And I think with that as well, the thing that I failed to do in the drawing is I think you can go higher. So the head is going up in space. As we come up into that spin, we're down and we're coming up. We're getting that spine reversal, and we're also getting that head raising in space. Because if I flick between this pose and this pose, where your head is and where it goes, it kind of is a similar y-axis. I mean, it's going up a little bit, but it's kind of going back on itself, which I think is messing the mechanics up. I think you need to go to screen left a bit with it, which is going to help. So this is kind of like preempting some mechanics for when you get to it. Better to figure that stuff early. Hopefully that was somewhat clear. So it's a bit more twist. It's a clear initial step here where we really feel that step, and then it doesn't move from that point on, and we just step onto that leg. And when the weight goes onto that leg, so the weight shifts all the way over, we can, counter rotate to get the reversal. So here we're going this way, and here we're going the opposite, right? So we get that nice C reverse C, or reverse C to C. And the head goes up in space, and a bit more twist, as we talked about. And then we can have this raised leg, and then that raised leg can then lead the next move. So the raised leg drops, comes down, which causes the body to twist, which causes everything else to flow through to the next pose, and it will have like a nice flow to everything. The next thing, I think when I play this, there's a few things, which the main thing is I just don't think this beat has enough time to read. So there's two things you can do. One of which is, I think you come up on the my instead of love. So you're coming up like 7 frames earlier, like my lovin', and then you can stay for the my lovin' in that up pose. And then on Paradise, you can turn. The other thing is, right now you cut before the action, whereas I think you want to cut a little bit later on the action. So right now you cut, we're up here still, and then you turn. So if you were up here, my love, and then you turning, and during the turn is when the cut happens. It will make it a bit more seamless and feel a bit less like we're cutting now, you're hitting your mark, you're hitting your beat, like you're an actor on a stage instead of, a real character naturally acting. So there's those two things, right? You come up earlier and you cut during this action. The other thing with this cut is I think you can separate their silhouettes a bit more, just cheat it. Obviously this is how it is in perspective, but when you get to this cut, you can just, another key, you key here, and you cheat her back a bit so you can clear their heads from each other, and get a clearer silhouette. Again, I'm saying it wouldn't actually be this pose because it would be this pose, but it would be the same thing where it's this pose, but she's further back this way and clearing him, doing whatever. So he's clear here or whatever, wherever it is, you know what I mean? It's just a clarity thing on that cut. We kind of miss a few things. So if you come up earlier, this is the overall note is the beat doesn't have enough time to read. So we're doing two things. We're coming up into that beat earlier, so we're holding it for longer because we're in it for longer by starting in there longer. And we're also holding it for a bit longer because we're not going to cut away from that beat into this next shot until, 3 or 4 frames later when we're already breaking down out of that main beat into the next pose. And we have the similar thing here where she turns and then we cut. I think you can delay that turn. Like you can delay the turn until during where the cut is. Like I think your cut timing's fine. Like you could do now up here. Maybe you could even open up the eyes for the now. And now, and then lead with like a little eye dart, and then you're turning on. You start turning on like till, and then during the middle of that turn is where we do the cut again. I wanted to show this is an example of really well cutting on action. You're cutting like midway through at the fastest point of the action usually. That way it is a bit more seamless. There's a lot of movement, so the eye knows where to look across the cut, whereas if there's nothing, the eye then has to readjust and know where kind of things are. But if you cut with movement and it's in a similar part of the screen, like screen left where she is the whole time, it's going to help the audience kind of track everything a bit easier. Cool, so that's the main thing for that. Here there's two things. I mean, I looked at your scene and the camera here is worse than the camera you have because you have these two beats of like out and then up, whereas in the scene It's very much just going in once, which is good. It should just be one move and then a continuous kind of ease, set slowing down like a soft ease. Is that it hits hard, but then it continues softly right up until the end of the shot almost, or you can be at a complete stop just before the end of the shot. But the other thing by looking at your scene is I think what you really need is you have this middle of the frame. This is where we should be pushing towards, and this is where the pose should go. So if we weren't zooming in, the final pose should be here, where she is coming in and he is coming in, and meeting in the middle. And we're pushing into that middle point. Everything's pushing into that middle point. Right now, what happens, and if we look at the scene, you can see it a bit more clearly. If we look at this, what happens is we push into the middle of her head, and then she just comes up whilst he comes all the way in. Instead, you want that thing of them both coming together, so she's pushing herself into him, not just him into her. It's both at the same time. That's going to kind of give you that nice energy, and it also makes sense with what we talked about last time, where you have that in, compress, and like release a very slight amount throughout the end of the shot. So it's like an overshoot settle thing. Boom, boom. I think that could really push and elevate that nice last moment, make it super clear. Yeah, so those are the main kind of bigger beats. As I said, it was going to be a short one because I think it's really getting there in terms of beats. The next thing to do really is just to get all of these bigger things figured out, which was a lot of timing and cut timing. But some of these cut timings depend on more breakdowns. So, more breakdowns are going to be needed. Then we can discuss mechanics and we can discuss more animation stuff. I know these first few have been mostly kind of making the idea work, but I think that's like 80% of animation. Execution is like the next stuff. Like that's obviously there's a lot of technicalities in the execution, which we're going to push. But once you get kind of the idea of working at this kind of level with this amount of poses, it's like almost easy. It's just kind of technical execution. I can foresee a lot of mechanic stuff. Like here, I noticed something where I think once you get that working, it's going to be easier. But there's probably a few points where some of these things, I'm not sure if you planned necessarily the steps as well as you might need to, but once we get into it, once you start breaking it down, you're going to discover for yourself, oh shit, how would I step here to get into this position? And then you're going to have to start kind of tweaking things and figuring things out as you go. It's natural, it happens all the time. Awesome. Cool, man. Best of luck with it. And I think it's like almost working really well for this stage. It's just those notes that I went over. And then it's execution. So I'll see you next time for execution notes, hopefully. Catch you later, dude. Thanks. Bye-bye.